been looking around for salvation. I've been looking around for the truth. All around me I see frustration, and I looked all over till I found you. I sit and listen to your stories, and you're telling me, please don't worry. There's a lot in this world you should know, and love in life is where you should go. If you're looking for somewhere to go, if you're looking for someone to know, if you're looking for someone to guide you, then love in life will guide you. I know that life outside is so hard. There's a lot of things that can tear you apart. I know the roads sometimes feel lonely, but remember you're not the one and only. There's always someone there to help you, a helping hand to pull you through. There's only one thing you should do: take my hand and join the Love and Life crew. If you're looking for somewhere to go, if you're looking for someone to know, if you're looking for someone to guide you, then let love and life guide you.
Goeienaand, good evening, fellow South Africans and citizens of the world, and welcome to tonight's live stream. And tonight I'm talking to Robin Pullen, who is a life coach, and we're going to be talking about a very big subject that's on everybody's lips in South Africa at the moment, and with good reason. Well, if you live in South Africa, life as we know it is pretty difficult right now. And of course, the reason for that is surviving not just the bug, which is a big challenge, but we get to navigate the systematic devastation of what's left of our economy at the brutal hands of the rolling electricity blackouts, strategically pandered to the population as a load shedding. Hardly a day goes by without experiencing the direct impact of the lack of electricity in one way or another. Even if you live in the luxury of an estate, or as one of the privileged untouchables protected by the prevailing political animal, you just have to venture out to drop kids off at school during a scheduled load shedding to see what I mean. Well, if you're lucky, you may even be assisted by the local homeless guy who's found a way to do more for the local community than many of the politicians who have failed him. But the lack of electricity supply is not the real problem that people like you and I are facing in our country right now. It's not load shedding that is making your life miserable. You are when you give personal powers away to the scenario that you find yourself in. When you let your thoughts about you believe is happening take over your feelings, which makes you frustrated and angry, perhaps even panic, as things feel like they're getting more and more out of control. And then when you want to do something about it, you just can't. What if you could change the quality of your thinking to be able to take proactive actions without being trapped by the cage of fear, and turn your setbacks, the real and imagined, into step-ups that will help you build a brighter future starting today? Well, that's a discussion we're going to be having tonight. I'm going to get Robin Pullen on, and let's get this discussion underway. Hi, Robin.
Good evening. How are you doing?
Good, buddy. How are you going?
Super, thank you.
Good. Now, I did a little bit of an intro about Eskom and how it's kind of, causing shit in everybody's lives. But before we get into that, tell us a little bit about yourself, Robin. What exactly is a Mindshift coach?
Okay, great question. Thank you. Just checking you can see my video clearly.
Absolutely. If I couldn't, I would be making a noise.
Okay, cool. Skype's doing interesting things tonight. So, Mindshift coaching is really about helping people understand that we are the result of our thinking. So you're in a mindset. I love that word. Our minds are set to a certain frame. And the work that I do is mostly about helping people understand or get a working understanding of the frame that they're in. And when you can take control back of your frame, you can rewrite your story. And that's where the shift begins to happen. And that shift really is centered about the quality of your thinking, the strength of your emoting or feelings, and then the ability to take action and do something different.
Right. Now when we talk about our thinking, our thinking, as I understand it, is really a sum total of our experiences and how we've dealt with them.
Sure, interesting. So when you say sum total, I want to bring another perspective. So thinking is actually a real-time experience. And when you say the sum total, that's more something about that has to do with your memory. And in a given moment, this is really the work of mind shift, of creating conscious awareness, of being able to come back into the moment. Because in any given moment, there's a couple of things happening. And the first thing that's happening is there's a reaction or a response, depending on where your power lies, to what's happening in front of you. Most of us will have an initial reaction, and then we'll be caught up in a set of triggers or flashbacks or memories of thinking. But that thinking that you take yourself into, that experience, and I want to say it's like a virtual experience. I mean, you're awake, you're living, you're breathing, you're seeing, you're thinking, but you're not actually thinking about what's in front of you. You're thinking about layers and layers, and most of those layers are past layers or assumed, presumed future layers. So another way of putting it, I was running this afternoon, I was thinking, how do I put this? Another way, because most of us are unconscious. But Scott, if I tell you, dude, you're unconscious, the average person will go, stuff you, Robin, I'm not. I'm like fully awake. And yes, you're awake, but you're hypnotized. You're not seeing what's happening right in front of you for what it is. You're already outside. I like to use the word, so it's not subconscious or unconscious, but just to the side of conscious, there's already a number of layers that you've taken on, that you're buying into: thinking layers, meaning layers, belief layers. And each of those layers is almost like a lens. So if I were to put my glasses on and the light would be reflecting into the camera, each one of those ideas, beliefs, emotions would change the tint, the color of that lens. And then I only see out, right? I look through my eyes, I hear and I speak, but I see out. I can't see in. I can't see myself except if I look down at my body, but I can't see my own face. So I look through these lenses, and then that's the thinking that I see. And then that's the world I believe I live in. But that world is my version of reality.
Right.
And most of us aren't living in a current, can I say, to use critical thinking language, it's a augmented or altered reality. It's not an objective. It's a subjective reality, not an objective reality. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So what you're saying, in effect, is that everybody's perception of the moment they're living right now is different. No two people see it the same.
I like that. Can I add a layer to what I hear you say?
Sure.
To each of us, our perception, our reality is unique. It's not any different. It's completely unique. Because I see reality as I see it, with all my own beliefs. And what I don't see is those beliefs are held in place by my own thinkings and my own emotings, my emotions and my feelings, and the somatic, the physical experience I have in my body.
Yeah. Now that's very interesting, because when we talk about a relationship between two people, okay, they meet and
Right.
you have that honeymoon stage, and then they get to that stage where things start, they become real. And because of those different perceptions, that's where you start having the abrasive stuff happening. Am I correct in that?
I like what I'm hearing you say. You use the word "they become real." And as you say that, what comes up for me is there's a gap between my expectation and my experience. And the degree of that gap, and when I say degree, if I were to take an expectation and I would take an experience, and imagine there's an imaginary rope between these two, the degree of how strong each of those, how strong I expect something and how strong I experience, and then another axis is if it's higher or lower. So if my expectation, which is a strong expectation, is higher than my experience, can you see the line goes up? Then I have this elevation. There's a steep curve.
Yeah.
And could be vice versa. So I'm freaking happy when I have an expectation, but my experience supersedes that expectation. And I'm going to just put a frame there. When I have a neutral expectation and my experience supersedes it in a positive outcome. But if I have an expectation, but my experience is negative, unresourceful, unfamiliar, uncomfortable, undesirable, then I have as strong an a effect, but it's a negative one. And it's that the distance between the expectation and the experience, and this difference, that's what creates that sandpaper. I forget the word you used, when we start to rub each other up the wrong way.
Yeah, the aggravation sets in.
Yes.
So what we're saying in effect is that let's take a couple.
Right.
The guy might be getting much more than he expected. He's really happy in the space he's in, but she's got exactly the opposite. And that's where the shit hits the fan, because she's not getting what she was hoping for, even though they're living the same moment.
Yeah. So they don't actually live in the same moment. They might be in the same physical space.
That's what
possibly
I mean.
Yeah, in the same, possibly in the same time and space reality. But the meanings are all different. And we don't slow down long enough to make sure that we're using the same words. And then we both say, okay, these are my expectations, but the word that I use for one thing, and that the same word that she uses has another set of meanings attached.
Different
and each of those meanings, correct, or calibrations, and each of those calibrations have an emotion attached. So we're both using the same words, let's have dinner, but when we say dinner, we actually have a different picture in our minds, and the kind of food, hot, cold, spicy, Is dinner a 5 p.m., 7 p.m., 9 p.m.? Is dinner a portion, a plate, a 3-course? There's so many things that adds distinction to them, and each one of them has an emotion. I place an emotion to it. Then so now I've got this expectation, then I have this experience, and then that's where this gap manifests. It starts to show up. And here's the thing: most of us are hypnotized, so we don't even consciously see that we're in this gap. We don't recognize, oh, what I'm feeling, what I'm experiencing is a gap. We just go in our unconscious, in our hypnotized way of like, hey, but that's what I expected. This isn't right. Something's wrong. And most of us don't go here first, don't go to ourselves and do reflection, self-reflection. Don't do, so when I say reflection, I mean I reflect. I think upon myself. I go, okay, what's happening here? Most of us, we look out. And we look out and we blame, or we look for fault. We're actually pretty good fault finding. Looking for the problem outside of ourselves.
Right. Now, what's your advice to people listening who might be in a relationship where things are going a bit pear-shaped because of what we're talking about here? How do they get things back on the same page? What are some simple rules?
Okay, I hear we're changing the topic quite a bit.
Oh no, we'll get back to Eskom in a second, but I'm just enjoying this discussion.
Yeah, and the reason I'm bringing that up is because actually there's a couple of tactics and tools. Really, tactics and tools are not the key. The strategy, and I'm going to answer your question, but I just want to highlight. I take a moment to highlight that this might feel or look different in a different scenario. However, taking back your personal power, the strategy is often the same regardless if you're at work or you're at home. As a coach, what I often find is, as a business and executive coach working with a leader, with an executive leader or a supervisory manager, I've often found that guys would come back to me, guys and girls, would come back and say, you know what, you won't believe this, but I've used this strategy that we were talking about here at work. I took some of this and I used it at home. And like things are starting to shift. I never expected that. Is that okay? Can I have this kind of positive outcome at home? And I'm like, absolutely. You see, the thing is, we're humans first, and we take ourselves to work, and then we bring ourselves back to home. We don't disengage. You might dress differently at home and at work. And you might show up different, you might act differently, you might have a different language set, so a set of words that you use at home. I once had a partner that I worked with professionally, and the best example is, like at home, you would say, thanks, lovey, or thanks, babe, but at work, you wouldn't do that. You wouldn't say that. And once or twice, I found myself in a professional context using a home context phrase or word. And I'd like in the middle of a meeting go, oh, thanks, babe. I mean, and find myself and correct myself. So come back to your question. So when you find yourself in a context, a container of relation with one person and one person to another, and it's sticky, it's uncomfortable. And what does that look like? It looks like you're not saying what you want to say, or when you're saying something, there's first an hesitation. There's first like, I don't have the confidence, I don't have a calmness in my body. My physical body's feeling a bit tense, and usually you don't even see it, but the shoulders are up and the body's like this. And I say, in mindfulness, we'll talk about a phrase. It's called perception management. I'll say what I think you want me to say, rather than what I feel I need to say.
Right.
So I abandon myself, and I put on this brave front, because I'm actually trying the positive intention in NLP. There's always a positive intention. The positive intention is to keep the peace. The positive intention.
You're trying to appease the other person.
Yeah. So there's good intent in the strategy, but what's happening is, okay, I'm doing more to manage my image in this scenario than I am just being my authentic self. So first things is when you find yourself, if you can I come back to breath. Just take a deep breath and go, am I being real with myself? Before you start to fix someone else, I don't know if you know this, but if I point with my hand at the camera, yes, I might have a trigger finger, the thumb is up, and I'm ready to use my power.
Yeah.
And I might be pointing, but there's always three fingers
back.
pointing back.
Yeah.
And I like to say there's mind, heart, and body, head, heart, and hands.
Right.
So there's always something about my thinking that I can point back. There's always something, head, heart. There's something about my emotions that I can look at, I can reflect back at. And then the third one, body. There's always something about what I'm doing, my behavior, that I can reflect on before throwing the first punch. So the first one is the fancy word for me. I had to look it up on all things, the oracle of Google, somatic. Soma means physical body. So can I get aware? Can I become aware of what I'm feeling in my body? And that feeling might be a dis-ease. It might be I'm uncomfortable now. It might be, for me, it was tied up in my throat. So just to be a bit vulnerable here, I am currently divorced. I am now divorced, but I was married for 16 years.
Right.
And even as a professional speaker and a motivational speaker and a team building guy and a leadership guy and a trainer, consultant, and organizational behavior management expert, you name it, a bunch of titles, trained thousands of people from around the world and all across the continent.
Yeah.
There was a season when I couldn't get this right for myself. I was ignoring the feeling in my body, and I was unconscious. I was hypnotized to my own personalizing and my own people-pleasing and self-abandoning habits that my whole throat was choked up. And my throat, I had a postnasal drip issue. So there was a somatic disease, a dis-ease symptom, a body symptom. So listen to your body. If I had known what I know now, I might have seen it 5 or 6 or even 10 years earlier. So I'm struggling to speak. Maybe someone's listening and there's a dis-ease, there's a discomfort in your body. Doesn't matter. You take a deep breath and it's still there. You drink some water and it's still there. Or another big one is resentment. This is the poison I drink to try and hurt someone else. When over a period of time, I become disappointed. Remember that gap between expectation and experience?
Yeah.
When that gap becomes so strong that I practice disappointment and then I add judgment, so I take my meaning on that and I give it a negative, I judge that scenario, and then I hold it against somebody and I start to, what was once love and what was once excitement and adventure, and this is the best and the rest, and you're my one forever, and then it slowly fades, and I'm experiencing, I don't know how else to put it, but it's like wearing a wet blanket, but it's a hot water blanket. It's just this hot, sticky heaviness that doesn't want to go away. And you feel it in your physical body, and you practice. So when you see somebody, you don't even see your own face start to cringe up. Maybe you start to feel that as soon as you want to talk to you pick up the phone to speak to someone, or you see that particular person call on your phone. As soon as you see the number or the name, there's a tense, there's an in-breath, and there's a tension in your physical body. Yeah. So the first one is, to answer your question, is what can we do? We can start to listen to our bodies. And then the next step that I would take is an out breath. So there's always an in-breath. So if I were to give you a fright, wow! Most people's first response, their first reaction is a survival one. You get a fright, you get to take a breath in.
Yeah.
But what are you going to do with that breath? And I'm going to invite you, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, geez, okay, I'm practicing the stress and strain I'm holding in my body. I'm practicing resentment. I'm practicing frustration. I'm practicing disbelief. So it doesn't matter what they say. Actually, I don't believe them anymore. So I'm discounting what they say. I don't believe, I'm disillusioned so much that I don't actually take their word for what it is anymore. And I'm mind reading, and whatever they say, I bring disbelief to them. So in breath, and then just an out breath, like one of my coaching clients last week brought to my attention. I said something quickly, and she's like, whoa, say it again. And this is what I said. Sometimes it's not about getting from absolute zero to positive, powerful hero. Sometimes it's just about getting back to neutral. Neutral can be enough. So most of the motivational world, most of the personal development, not every single one. It's about like hero and power, and if you've got a problem with your relationship, you've got to fix it, and you've got to do the personal work and the shadow work and a whole bunch of stuff. And whilst that is true, and yes, there's lots of work to do, and there's a lot of work I can support someone with, a lot of the biggest gains, the most powerful gains, is not about like trying to fight to get the win. It's about just coming back to neutral. Getting out of this dark, this undesirable, this negative. And for me, the first big step, so after that in-breath, is to just breathe it out. And in breath work, the key is double and longer your in-breath. So if you breathe in for 2 seconds, then you need to slowly breathe out, and that out-breath must last longer than 4 or more seconds. Okay. So like a 6 second or 8 second. So you breathe in and then slowly breathe out. Right. And you can breathe out, and you can do that in a conversation without anybody noticing.
Yeah.
You can breathe in your breath. You can't see in the camera right now, but if I breathe in my chest and abdomen cavity more than here, I can do a lot of breathing without it being visible here. Right. So I can be in a tense conversation, and I can hold my composure, and I can still practice that out breath. So the first is being aware. It's like, okay, I'm feeling in my body, I'm feeling something. Yeah. And it happens, I'm going to just pull in before we get into the conversation about Eskom, but exactly this happens. So I'm in a context where our grid is exempt from load shedding because of several years of infrastructure failure. So basically the switchboards in our areas are so damaged that if they do switch it for load shedding, the chances of it blowing up and not being able to repair it are significantly high. So they've excluded that particular box from load shedding until they can have the funds to replace that whole substation. Yeah. That's the short version. And yet there was a power outage yesterday. And I laughed because I just said to your assistant, no, don't worry, we're exempt. I'm okay. Power won't be a problem here. And power goes out. And I'm like, there we go. Okay, so what am I feeling in my body?
Yeah.
That's the first awareness. Okay, so there's the confusion, there's the frustration, there's the stuff that can then lead to panic. But I'll get into that. So in a relating, and now with post, I don't know if I can say the word, but post the big C, and post pandemic, and now depending where you are in the world, different crises. One of my friends is a journalist in the Ukraine, so now in war. We're in South Africa, we're in an infrastructure war. There's a daily war of, will you have power today? Will you have electricity? And if you're in Johannesburg, then they add the component of, will you have water today?
Yeah.
I remember working in Tanzania and in Kenya and in northern eastern Tanzania. It was regular, like twice a week we would have an afternoon without electricity for the entire region.
Yeah. But
the response was different. So here in the big city, here in South Africa, across South Africa, there's still that response. And maybe it's easy to describe the scenario. Okay, Eskom's got load shedding. But what happens when your partner decides to do some load shedding? Like they don't keep their word, or they show up late, or they're just being what you would call stubborn. So the power isn't equal, but now there's a load shedding. There's a withdrawal, an absence of that expectation. Now your experience, like freaking hell, what would I do? And most of us go straight into a triggered response. It's actually, this is the heart of what I wrote about in my book, Get Activated, how to turn from a reaction, instinctive reaction, to an intentional response.
Right.
So I don't know if you've heard of I'm doing a lot of talking, so interrupt me if you want.
No,
you want to ask
go
a
ahead.
question.
Go ahead.
I don't know if you've heard of the amygdala. That's that at the base of your brain, at the top of your spinal column, where basically it's like two almonds at the base of your brain,
Right.
and they are in South Africa. Most people listening will know what a pointsman is. They're the traffic officer or trained pointsman, or in South Africa right now, the best is they're the local hobo who once was, I don't know, an electrician, a plumber, an artist, but is now homeless for a couple of years, been living under the tree. You drive past him every single day. You've never noticed him, but now with load shedding, he comes out, and here's this guy who lives under the tree is now directing traffic. And it's fascinating to see the different people's responses to, our government is so effective that even the hobos are doing more work in the local community than some of our politicians. But that's another comment.
Yeah.
So this amygdala, this organ in our brain, really has two jobs. It's a filter between the outside world, our experiences, and our sense-making system. And when I say filter, it looks like this. There's a trigger. Maybe it's your ears. You hear something. Perhaps you see something. Perhaps senses. Soma, I feel something. One of those senses. Or you smell something. And that gets translated into an electromagnetic or a neurological signal.
Right.
And it's first going to go to this little almond guy, this amygdala. And it's going to ask two questions. The first question is this dangerous? Am I safe? And it's going to qualify, is this a survival? Do I need to go into survive, to flight, fright, freeze, or fawn? Or can I be in my rest? Can I be just alert, calm? The second thing it's going to do is do I recognize this? Have I seen this before? And this is where I'm tying into what I heard you say earlier on. Most often, when we're hypnotized, we don't see it for what it is. We don't measure what the person says for what they're saying. We measure it by the meanings, the layers that we give. And those layers all have emotions. So very quickly, the amygdala can get us a signal that's translated into a neurological message, a signal. So I hear something that in a split second triggers an emotional memory to another time-space reality in my past. And that event is coded in my body as painful or fearful. And then I get confused in a moment. Because remember last time I was on your show, we were mentioning that the brain cannot tell the difference between a physical event and an imagined one.
Right.
In the brain, in the theater of your mind, there is no difference between what is a current real-time source and a memoried or remembered or created source. They're all source. They're all data. They're all neurological messages going through the network of neurons. So in a moment, you can get triggered to a flashback of a powerful, painful experience. And now your partner says something, and you are instantly transported to another time-space reality, 2 months, 2 years, 20 years ago. And you react from that. Now, here's the good news. This amygdala, this is a family-friendly show, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let me put it this way. This amygdala, it's kind of like a young teenager. It gets turned on really quickly, but it doesn't last so long.
Okay.
And that strength is like super powerful. It can shut your system down. It can shut your executive brain down. It can trigger the lizard brain, the reptilian brain. It can cause havoc with your reticular activating system, one of the guidance systems in your brain. But it doesn't last longer than 2.5 to 3 seconds. So you can shortcut the amygdala. You can confuse it. Because what it does, if it hijacks that thought, it's now like that pointsman. It says, okay, stop the bus. This is, and it gives it a meaning, and it starts to direct your core functions. But if you just take a deep breath in and you hold it, so at the top of your in-breath, you have a retention, a breath hold. You retain that in-breath. And you do it for 1,000, 2, 1,000. By the time you get to 3, you've dislodged the instinctive reaction of that amygdala.
Right.
And you can come out of hypnosis and back into reality. So that's the power of that in-breath. So when my partner says something, I now, regardless of what it is, before I get reactive, I now go, okay, let me hear that. Let me disrupt the amygdala. And instead of giving myself over to reaction, let me open myself up to a response. Because it could be a memory that's triggered, or it could be something that's happening in front of me right now. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah. So what you're saying in effect is that by taking that little breath and taking that little break, rather than coming out with a spontaneous response, which could be just inflammatory, you have that moment to actually reassess and then say something which is not so damaging.
Yes. That reassess, I like the word realign. Actually, it's not a realign, it's to align. So to reassess is to check again. So I'm actually, let me just assess this. Okay, whoa. So more often than not, so as coach, when I've also done some mediation. So one of my personal projects is called Visible Felt Dad, and I work with dads. I work with men who have kids to help connect the relationship with their children. So I had a big challenge as a divorced dad. I'm not living in the same physical space, but how do I create? In the marketplace, in the business place, I did visible felt leadership. I helped leaders learn how to be visible, present, and felt by frontline staff. And that could be 5, 6, 7 levels of leadership down. And like Goldfields had 62,000 staff when I was working with them. Anglo America, 38,000 in Southern Africa. BHP Bulletin, 18,000. And I was helping the executive team lead through behavior and communication through levels of leadership, so that expectation and experience at the boardroom was similar at the rock face.
Yeah, well, I can tell you a potential client for yourself, and that's Discam, because I think they have completely lost the plot.
Yeah, there's so many versions to that story.
Yeah.
So I'm coming back to the dad and to the person in the relating. So I need to assess. I need to go, okay, what's actually going on here? And I want to get out of the hypnosis, because here's the thing. When I speak to guys, when I speak to people in relatings, and it's like, it's not, oh, this isn't working. This didn't happen last night. This place of we're misunderstanding one another. It's never a problem the first time. It's probably the 31st time or the 300th and first time. Let me do a Jacob. The 300th, 11th, 100th and first time. But we do it so often that we become numb, or a better word, unconscious, or a more comfortable word, we get hypnotized by both your reactions and my reactions. And then what was uncomfortable and unfamiliar becomes familiar. And then I become comfortable, this familiar, unresourceful behavior. And then there's a trigger point. It's like, actually, I can't do this anymore. I've run out of grace or patience, or I'm reminding myself of who I am. And I'm like, there's this internal energy. Like, I can't switch myself off. I've abandoned myself so much that I'm actually don't know who I am. And I start to ask myself, like, what's going on here? And then what was familiar but uncomfortable becomes unbearable. And now I can't handle the way he acts or she acts, or I can't handle what's been said.
Yeah.
And that gap. So then I come back to, okay, this didn't happen last night. I've allowed this to happen over time. Take my breath, come back to myself. And then the third step is specificity. So what is it? So firstly, just listen to your body. Second, unhook the amygdala.
Yeah.
Come back into real time. And to get back into real time, third step is specificity. And that comes to language. To when you're like, no, I'm angry with you. What do you mean angry? What does that word mean? No, you did this or you did that. What is this? I don't like it when you do this. What is this? What specifically? Is it what I say? Is it how I say it? Is it the words that I say it? Is it, I remember, to give you an example, to ground this in an example, I had a fallout with my previous partner about something, a reaction with one of my kids. and the fallout was messy, but so beautiful when I revisited it, because we were able to like slow things down, calm ourselves down. I was able to calm myself down. And what happened, to give you an example, is the child did something, and then the adults in the room both responded. But the one response was forceful in behavior, and the other response was forceful in ideas. And each of us interpreted our responses differently. And that caused a collision. That caused a dis-ease.
Right.
And taking away, so what happened, to give you an example, to give you a picture, is I saw her moving quickly across the room with definite, with focused intention on her physical behavior, and her physical movement towards my child.
Right.
And I translated that, important word, I gave the behavior and the movements that I saw based on a calibration of time, of energy, of gestures. So it wasn't just no, don't do that. It was and based on my own insecurity and my belief frames, I calibrated that behavior. I gave it a judgment. I judged that behavior to a meaning. And because of that meaning, I responded. And because of my response, which she calibrated in her meanings, then that respond, and then we ended up with this mess.
Yeah.
Can
I just put to you what I've heard when it comes to relationship issues, and we'll get into Eskom in a second, but because this is actually very much related to the subject we're going to be talking about tonight, because it's all about what we think. Now, what someone said to me, and it is amazing how effective this is if someone asks you a question which you take to be insulting, or in some way attacking you, the best way to actually get or let the air out of the balloon is to actually respond to that question with a question back to that person, saying, what you just said to me, do you mean da, da, da? So you don't actually respond to the question, but you basically turn it around so that that person is then forced to get out of that little zone where they're not really conscious what they're saying, but they've now got to think about what they said, because there are two types of things. There's, if someone's really emotional and you ask them a rational question, you pull them out of that emotional state, because all of a sudden they've got to think rationally about what you said. So with this thing about asking a question in response to a question that's been targeted at you, what are your thoughts on that?
I love it. So what you're describing is another version of what I've been talking about.
Yeah.
So you use the word rational. So when we're emotional, when our emotions are up, our critical thinking is low, is down. Because the thinkings that I use are loaded with emotion. And those aren't thoughts. Those are thoughts clouded with emoting, with meanings.
Yeah.
And each of the meanings are tied into beliefs. So they're not positive or negative, but they're not neutral. They all have a loaded meaning. So emotions are not wrong. They're powerful. They're messengers. And in that scenario, as you described, I'm reminded of, I don't know if I can name it, but I will anyway, one of the best courses that I went through and I can recommend is Imago. I think it's Dr. Hendricks. Imago's couple counseling, or the dialogue process. And that's what I hear you describe. And it's really, and I use this in my coaching. I use this same principle. In that scenario, when someone's questioning me, it's not a rebuttal or a discount or a defend or a deny. What I'm I'm actually checking in. So I in breath, and
Yeah.
a psychological in breath is, okay, what's the question here? So what I heard you say is, that's my first phrase.
Yeah.
And I give it feedback to them.
Yeah.
And I do two things there. First is, in giving it back to the person in as feedback, I'm demonstrating respect. I'm demonstrating I'm
That
listening.
you listened, yeah.
Yeah. And then two things happened on top of that. The first is my amygdala is declutched, clutch is in, as is theirs. Because I'm giving them that feedback, I'm giving them that 3 seconds to reorganize, to come back to neutral. So, and then so what I heard you say is, and I check, and then I get an opportunity for them to say yes, and that comes to my third point of specificity. Yes, you heard me, or no, you didn't.
Yeah.
What I wanted you to hear me say is, and that's the counter. There's always two parts of so it's not a monologue, it's a dialogue,
Right.
dio 2. So what I heard you say is, and then yes, you got me, or no, what I wanted you to hear me say is.
Right.
Now
and
this
that's where the clarification comes in, which basically lets the
Correct.
air out of the balloon.
Correct. So I like that phrase, lets the air out of the balloon. It disarms the emotion in the system that is negatively charged.
Yeah.
It doesn't let air out because there's still, it lets another air in. It lets air of respect, of rapport, of honor, of trust. That's still substance. That's important. That's stuff. I want that there.
Yeah, it changes all the negative stuff.
Correct. So if anything, it brings it back to neutral, and quite often it's powerful enough to bring in a positive.
And you might find the person who you ask the question of their question suddenly says, "Oh, I actually didn't mean that," and because they're in that hypnotic state where they said something, Correct. They don't realize that what they've said is actually, rather demeaning.
Or let me add to build on what I hear you say. Not only is it rather demeaning, they then realize my meaning of what they said. Because I'm going to come in just with that clarification. I'm not suggesting you're wrong.
Yeah.
I just also want to suggest that as right as you are to you, this is what I'm hearing. And there's that gap, the expectation experience.
Right.
So the richness of that communication, the communication becomes rich when both perspectives now have airtime.
Yeah.
And we understand, we find each other. So that's how that dialogue process that you brought into our conversation is such a gift. Maybe that's step 4 for that couple, that person, that relationship, that's training. I assume couple. It could be at work. It could be on the bus to work.
Right.
It could be in one of the most difficult places to play. One of the most difficult games to play is moms in the car park. Moms waiting for kids. Man, the stuff that goes on between moms in the car park at school, it can be vicious. It can really be rough. It can be tough stuff. You think your kids have a rough time in the playground. Some of the moms get beaten up in the car park. And this can also just help disarm some of that poisonous negative energy in conversation.
Yeah. No. Gavin Barr has said, just regarding what we're just talking about, he said, that sounds like my team chat room. We're always asking a question to a question, maybe to get more info on the problem, but it often leads to the originator solving the problem. No.
Great comment. So let me quickly build on that. So,
go ahead.
So the art of questions is not about asking more questions for asking questions' sake. That's called deflection. The art of asking questions, great questions, get 2 things: specificity and clarity. And Gavin, one of the things I take away when I work with teams, I have a process that I work towards, and I just want to know who does what, where, when, how, and why. So it's like, www. It's like, I just want to get the world straight. I just want to know for every specific. So it's not like let's ask 1,000 questions, because then we just delay, then we distract. And in neurosemantics, in NLP, one of the meta programs or thinking styles that loves this is the global thinker, the person who gets very uncomfortable with specific with details.
Right.
And they like to just keep things in the ether, like in the grand scheme of things. And whilst that's comfortable for that person, it's very disorganizing, disorienting. It doesn't help the team. So questions are great when they're specific and they're bringing about clarity so that you can do something.
Right.
And it's, to me, the measurement, the calibration I use for a question is so that. You can ask a question, but the answer must get me to a so that I can or I can't or I should not, or this will or this won't. I want clarity. That's the point.
Right. Now, let's turn our discussion back towards load shedding, because
What? Load? What?
okay, blackouts or whiteouts or whatever you want to call them. Now, as a Mindshift mental performance coach who engages with people every day, what is the one thing you're hearing people say most often about load shedding?
So actually, I wrote that down for you to ask, and I've been thinking through that because I had a potential answer earlier, and then three things happened in the last day. I mentioned the one is that the power went out in my neighborhood.
To you.
Yeah, it actually happened. So I'm protected. I was going to use the words, not that. I'm buffered to a degree because in this particular scenario, we don't have the regular outings. However, my business is affected. How many clients don't show up? How many calls haven't been made? How many people have to reschedule, then never show up? So there's a real impact. And then every time I do get to speak to someone, the navigating the impact in their system that load shedding is having. And perhaps it's not actually a spoken word, but this is what I'm seeing. It's a double-edged sword of frustration and loss of control or loss of power. So when I feel it's like the power went out, I'm like, okay. It's interesting how, and I wrote a post on this on social media. It's interesting how in that moment I'm actually surprised. I'm surprised by my own reaction. I'm surprised that I'm still surprised. How many people do you know? Now, you're a little bit removed from the scenario, but I'm pretty sure you're still, like even your assistant, we were chatting during the week, and she has to navigate this load shedding and balance stuff. And there's so many people, like even this week, we're going between level 2, level 3, and then it's level 4. Okay, we haven't been at 6 again for a while, but you never know in one day whether it's going to stay in the staging that it was suggested the previous day. So the fact that we're going to go into a window of load shedding is no longer a surprise. Yet, when it happens, it's like, we're still surprised. And in that surprise, in that moment of surprise, there's something that's going on. And one is, I don't like change. So my question is what I'm hearing people say, but not using the words. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I'm hearing people say, I don't like being out of control. And when I'm out of control, how I'm reacting. And there's a couple of ways a person can react. More often than not, and this is my thesis, is, the problem in South Africa right now is not the load shedding. The problem is that whether it's the big C, whether it's load shedding, whether it's water, whether it's municipal government, whether it's policing, whenever we're in that moment, when I don't have electrical power, I give my personal power away. And I allow the scenario to take over my thinking.
The frustrations.
So I can create frustration. That's one of them. I can, and I felt this, Scott. I felt this just yesterday, and I'm chatting to your assistant last night, and I'm chatting to my sister and my brother during the day, and I'm listening to some of my coaching clients and the people in my community, and the frustration is real. So the problem then is not the frustration. The problem is, what do I say to myself? Number one, and number two, what do I choose to believe when I experience the frustration?
Yeah.
So one of the things that I'm hearing is a loss of control. I don't have control over this.
Yeah.
And then we get different people. We have one person who has a high internal authority. In other words, I decide for myself what's good, what's bad, what's right, what's wrong. Or you have a person with a stronger external authority, which looks like I always need to check in. If someone will just tell me what's right or what's wrong, as long as I get my reference, I take my lead from others. So the internal guy, the person who has a strong internal sense of authority and has this lack of control, it's like my control's been taken away from me. Who are you, Eskom, to rule my day, to mess with my day? And that creates a certain kind of frustration, probably laced, if I try that on, it's probably laced with anger. And that what's behind that anger is perhaps a fear. Now, some of your audience, I can imagine, like, dude, no, that's not me. You might not like what I'm hearing, or you're going like, I'm in control of my thinking, Robin. Sorry, great ideas, but this doesn't fit for me. And I invite that kind of person, to just feel, as we spoke earlier, just feel in your body. So when you find yourself in that, it's not right or wrong. I'm not judging here. I'm observing. That's my role as a mind shift coach, as a mind architect. I'm not here to say whether your thinking style is good or bad. My question is, does it serve you? Is it helping you? So when I'm feeling that frustration, right? I'm like, okay, I'm surprised the power went off. I'm surprised. I have this schedule. I use apps. I use a bunch of stuff. Just changing the picture up a bit here. I use a scheduler to have coaching clients show up for a call. Most of my work now is online. Surely, we're approaching, next month's my birthday month. We're approaching November. Surely in 2022, by November, that's already end of October, it's 10 months. People have had an opportunity to get used to the idea that once, twice, 3 times a day, the power is going to go off at a particularly regular time. And regular might not be the same every day, but I have a schedule. I have an app on my device that I can check when it's like I can plan for this. Surely in October 2022, people will not be caught out by not being able to have electrical connection, to be able to get on a laptop, to be able to jump onto a Zoom call and have a face-to-face meeting. And yet it happens.
Right.
And yet there are people who today still don't have the ability to manage the stuff in their system and coordinate and reorganize so that they can show up for scheduled meetings. So then 2 things happen. I get frustrated. I'm like, what? So it does 2 things for me. I get frustrated with that individual. I get to choose, okay, am I going to breathe in or I'm going to get hijacked? Because the other side of that frustration is like, look what this is doing to my business. How am I supposed to run a business in South Africa if I can't manage the electricity, I can't manage my own power? Like yesterday, even in a context that's exempted, even in an exempted space, we're not I want to say oblivious, we're not impervious to the impact of Eskom. But second and third degree, every day I am. And that creates not just this frustration, but it creates a sense of fear. Listen to my body. It's like, okay, if I can't control this, and I can't control whether people show up or not, and I can't control my pipeline, and I can't control, like I need to reorganize what I plan to do for the day. So when am I going to do my coaching? When am I going to do my recordings of resources? When am I going to do outbound reaching, my promoting work, that leads up to selling and closing more deals? Then I have to collect kids, or I don't have to, I get to collect kids, and quickly it gets busy. But in that busyness, laced with frustration and with fear, that becomes an unresourceful reality. Because then the state that I'm experiencing, the physical experience in my body, is one of stress and strain.
Right.
Not rest and flow.
So what you're actually doing is exacerbating the situation.
Yeah. So it's no longer an issue about electricity.
Right.
It's about what am I choosing to label, to describe, and the meaning I give to this particular moment.
Yeah.
And how I allow that to create a state in me.
Yeah. I think most people just feel absolutely flat. They feel like they've, that their lives have been basically in that moment of time. It's like helplessness. You're sitting there and there's nothing you can do about it. So what is significant about this, Robin?
Well, that you've just said, that's what's significant about it. When we do this often enough, we hypnotize, we allow ourselves to be hypnotized. Let me get more specific. We were talking about communication earlier. This is what specificity looks like. When we do this often enough, what do I mean? When I allow myself to get caught up in the moment, so a person doesn't show up for a call, and I don't just see it for what it is. Oh, they didn't show up. But I rather choose to believe, oh, then the next one's also going to. So I do pervasive thinking. I do pessimistic thinking. You see, I can't run a business because people aren't going to show up. Eskom's killing my business. And I spiral out of control. When I do that often enough, I hypnotize myself into that scenario, and then I learn to practice hopelessness. Because if I can't control these things, I can't control my thinking, I can't control my feeling, and I can't control how other people think, and I can't control how other people behave. So if they're going to be able to prioritize to get their life into order and schedule more effectively and coordinate and reorganize and change management 101, get a South African passport, come to South Africa, get a visa, come live here for 6 weeks, and you'll learn some change management 101. It's a beautiful opportunity. But if you can't do that, then you learn to practice hopelessness.
Yeah.
Helplessness first. I can't. Helpless. And when you're helpless, you're hopeless. And then if I'm helpless, hopeless, and I've got pessimistic thinking, this is what's so important about this. This is how we practice depression.
So it's not just to put it another way, it's not just a physical reality that you've got no power and those machines can't work, etc., etc. It's actually the mental reality that because of that, you just feel so disincentivized. You just kind of like, oh God, you just feel flat.
Yes. So you're using the word flat. You're to use the other phrase you used earlier. All the air is out. The balloon is like, I let all the air out. So then I heard someone say, like, oh, I might as well just go lie down. And I felt it as well. I felt the temptation. It's like, okay, we've got, I don't know, it's going to be half an hour, it's going to be an hour, it's going to be 4 hours. I don't know. And there's a real temptation. There's this invitation to go, oh, I'll just sleep it off. And I have an opportunity to throw that window of time, that time resource, which I'll never get back. I can throw it away. And then I catch myself thinking, why? Why is it that when the electricity is off, I physically can't do anything? My pen still works. My paper still works. I can open the curtains. I can light a candle. Look, it's 2022. It's October 2022. I actually have lights that are charged by batteries. I even have stuff that has solar charging. I have no excuses. I can, if I will, if I choose to, if I use this nugget on the top of my shoulders, there is something that I can do that is forward movement. Movement creates motion. Motion generates motivation.
And just building on that, because the general population are going to be deflated and thinking negatively, if during this period with load shedding and you have a business and you proactively look at the positive side, you can ironically build that business because everybody else is sitting around saying, oh, this is too hard.
So here's the thing, Scott, as you've just said, they're just out of reach. Here's one. Here's a piece of paper, book of papers. I have a pile of books. I went onto a local online store and I found a pack of 20 books or 25, and I bought 2 packs. So here's my reality. A couple of years ago, before the big C and pandemics and global lockdown, I became digital. I became a digital nomad. I literally got rid of everything paper. I lived in a couple of suitcases and some boxes, and my entire world my reality went online, digital, mobile, digital nomad. And then the whole world stopped. And I had an opportunity. It's like, okay, now what? And it became really busy, really noisy, really quickly. Late last year and beginning of the year, I'm like, hang on, let me slow things down. And I went back to paper. So now I write every day. I have stuff. This is actually, so here's my thing for the day. I'm competent, completely digital. I can live a completely digital life, no, digital nomad. I don't have to touch a pen and paper at all. I don't even have to pick up a book to read. I can do everything online. However, there's an opportunity for me to come back, bring a pen to paper, slow things down, reorganize. And because of load shedding, there's been windows where I can just put my thoughts to paper. So instead of another idea dropped in my brain dump, it's a tactic I use in my thinking processes.
Right.
That brain dump is now, it's a gift. It's now, I have a separate book of brain dumps of ideas that I can put into my programs or into my new products or capture. Now, all of that stuff I used to do digital, but when everything's digital, it can also disappear. So there's a positive side if you are conscious to see it. There's a positive side of being dehypnotized to being like, put the clutch in and let's go, okay, what's going on around here? But it's a choice that I make. And I'm suggesting to the audience that this is a choice that we can make. When the power goes out, we can take our power back.
Right.
So there are people who feel, I'm deflated. I'm just going to lie down. I'm just going to, and I get that. And and it makes sense to me when you're feeling that way in your body, particularly for me, between 12 and 2 o'clock is I've actually called it for several years now, I called it my Eskom hour. It's when my physical body's energies are at its lowest. So my circadian cycle comes down. 2 o'clock, I want to rest, man. I'll take a power nap. I'll do some reflection, maybe some meditating. I'm not strong. I'm not a quick thinking. I'm not strong at 2 o'clock in the day. So to be real with myself, if I'm feeling down, if I'm feeling blue or heavy or, and it's around that time, and it has to, and as we're speaking, I see a notification for Eskom power for the next neighborhood. And like that trigger, I see that thing. If that happens at 2 o'clock, it's easy for me to feel, I feel heavy and slow. And then if I'm feeling in my body heavy and slow, lethargic, it's easy to confuse that to feel, I'm depressed, because that's what depression does. Depression is.
Okay, now for those who are listening to this live stream, what sort of transformation do they have to go through in their thinking? Because it's in the head. It's all in the head. What do they have to do to experience this change from being negatively impacted by load shedding to actually saying, hey, here's an opportunity?
Yeah. So brilliant question. And I come back to how we got distracted in our conversation right at the start.
Yeah.
And one of the gifts that I've come into, so there's lots of fancy thinking, critical thinking, mindfulness, but come back to your body. Come back to, okay, this is what I'm feeling. And just because I'm feeling something in a sensory experience doesn't mean that it might be what it is. Okay, that sounds like global thinking. So sensory just because if I throw water on your body, wet is a feeling. If that's water, it makes me feel hot or makes me feel cold, I might respond differently. I'll give different meanings. If it's a sprinkle of water or if it's a bucket of water, I might give it a different meaning. So here's the thing. The first is the fancy word is proprioceptive. Can I perceive what my physical body is going through? So come back to the body. A tight muscle in my chest doesn't equal heart attack. It could be a burp. It could be short of breath. Sweaty skin, water, moisture on the skin can just be moisture on the skin.
Yeah.
You might sweat when you're happy. You might sweat when you're tired. You might sweat when you're scared. There's many reasons, scenarios that create the body's response to create sweat. But what we do most of the time is we confuse the symptom, we confuse the experience with a triggered past memory. So the first thing we can do, if you want change, if you want to be able to make some change, is first slow down and just make a distinction between what am I experiencing in my physical body before I give that a meaning, where that meaning might be triggered in a flashback, an emotional flashback.
Right. Now, look, I've got a couple of comments here I just want to put to you.
Yeah,
Mark G
I can't
says,
see them, so read them.
yeah. Mark G says, the trick is to be prepared always. When load shedding strikes, like it did for me over 2 hours ago, I have my own power that I switched on like a light switch, keeping my
Yes.
peace and sanity. And
Yes.
Myra Page says, the mind is like water. When life is turbulent, it's difficult to see. When it's calm, everything becomes clearer.
Yeah. There's a Bruce Lee quote that suggests, be like water. Water is fluid. Water takes form. Over time, water can shape form. So over time, a little trickle of water over a rock can make a waterfall, can cut a mountain in two. But in that moment, water is fluid. It is without form. It's formless. It takes the form of its environment. But we are stubborn and human, and we tie our emotions into our experiences, our body experiences, and then we fight and we resist them. So the second thing, after being physically aware, the second thing, and I don't have the time to go into it now, but one of the most powerful practices a person can choose to go into is the practice of acceptance, learning to practice or to accept, to learn how to accept it for what it is. So what that looks like is like stubbornly rejecting the idea that the electricity is off. You can be in a dark room, lights all out, and you're just fighting like in your mind, this isn't fair. Excuse me, this isn't right. This shouldn't happen now. Like, it's like gravity. You might not agree with it. You might not even understand it. You might not accept it. And gravity is just going to look at you and say, well, it sucks. But gravity is.
It's a reality.
And it's a reality. And we need to, in acceptance, to use the word you used a little earlier, I reassess. So I assess, the power's off. I reassess, okay, so it's just electricity. I don't have to keep my power away. And I can practice acceptance. Now that I accept this reality, I can access my thinking, my personal powers to think, to speak, to emote, and to do. And rather than go and give my powers away and lie down and sleep it off on the bed, which is nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
However, it's not serving you. If that's the middle of the day and that's your new normal and you've been hypnotized to sleep whenever the power goes off, it's not serving you.
Yeah.
I'm not judging it's right or wrong. It's just not serving you. You can do something better.
Right. Now, just to use my own analogy where I said you answer a question with a question.
Right.
When we're talking about this issue with load shedding and people's mindset, what you're advocating is that if you have a mind shift from being negative about that load shedding to looking for positive angles as to what you can do or how you can use your time, you can actually make that actually very productive for yourself.
A powerful moment. So 2 hours of load shedding could actually be very powerful for you when you access your personal powers. So most people, power goes off, I stop thinking. My emotion goes up, I'm frustrated, I'm angry, I'm disappointed, all of that. Bring those emotions down through acceptance, and I'm suggesting just come back to neutral. And in that neutrality, or the fancy people would call it equanimity, in neutral, I can access my powers to think. I can think things through. I can change my emotion. And emotion is the seedbed, is the heartbeat of energy. With heightened or elevated emotion, what was anger for me can become excitement, adventure, a renewed energy. And with that, then I can speak. I can speak to myself, my thoughts and my energy, and I can speak to others. And then I can do something, those 4 personal powers. And in that, what was a load shedding, so, I mean, it's the DMS, the demand side management. That's where it comes from, the municipal management of this infrastructure of energy supply. So let's not shed the load. Let's take this moment of time and reload. So it was a setback. Why don't you use it for a set up?
Right.
And then when you're starting to use your personal powers, like I'm starting to do, the periods of load shedding that were once not like just normal hypnotic, it's another 2 hours. It's like, whoa, okay, I've got to rethink. So like the one person said, I've got to make sure I've got the resources, my generator, water, batteries, whatever, like boil the water before. So I'm slightly addicted to caffeine. So boil the water in time so that now I make a powerful hour. I have a power hour. When the power goes off, I have a power hour. I'll sit down with intentional thinking, with thought, with my paper, my pen. And it's not only that set back is now a set up, it's become a step up.
Now, look, I'm going to be wrapping up this live stream shortly, Robin, but there's something I want to talk to you about because it is so common in our lives today. And I'm talking about misinformation. Okay, I'm not talking about the fake mainstream media. I'm talking about some of the shit that you read on WhatsApp, which never happens, and you say,
Yes,
bullshit,
I get one at least every day.
Yeah. Now, look, I got this email, and for those who are listening, that these are two terms that could become quite big in the future, based on what Klaus Schwab is saying with the New World Order. And they are GESARA, that's GESARA, and NESARA, which is NESARA. And you can Google these to find out more. Now, GESARA stands for Global Economic Security and Reformation Act, and NESARA stands for the National Economic Security and Recovery Act. And the reason I'm talking about this, and this is a complete and utter conspiracy theory, and I would suggest this is 99% BS, but it's been pushed out there as fact. And I just want to get your views on how this sort of stuff is impacting people. This is what the email says. It says, last night I attended the common law meeting on the Gold Coast. This is here in Australia and Queensland. Graham Duck talked about the events that are about to happen around the world, both financially and with the military. He is involved to the highest level and could only share what he could under his non-disclosure agreement. So here is a brief summary of the information he shared. As you know, this is event-based, so there are no specific dates. Here it goes. A global lockdown will happen any time from now. Graham hinted potentially from late October, but this must be implemented before the 8th of November for this. Here's your acronyms, GESARA, NESARA, to take place. And what apparently will happen, this is in Australia again, you'll receive a text message, an email advising you to be home within 3 hours. If you can't get home, you need to find accommodation like a hotel or motel, all flights, trains, interstate and overseas travel will be suspended. For our safety, advise not to leave home until the military tells us it is safe to do so. This will be for about 10 days. So brace yourself. Food, dressing items, possibly some water, power supplies, solar power, cooking gas, and make sure you have some cash because obviously electricity won't be working during these times. Now, this is where the fear shit comes in, okay? And look, I believe the banks will fail. I have no doubt in my mind that the fiat monetary system as we know it is going to collapse. But this is what the email says. It says, before the 8th of November, all banks, or 10th of November, all banks will fail. Some already have. The military will possibly help with some basic supplies as well. Graham advised that right now the rest of the world is being cleaned out, so there will be armed military on our streets. This is for our protection. The military will perform operations he couldn't expose. This is just for our safety. All politicians, police, hospital staff, etc. will have to resign because of NESARA, GESARA. and anyone who doesn't will be arrested. And then it goes on to say there's nothing to fear. Just be the light for others and stay in the highest vibration. The future is truly gorgeous, da 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 da. Now, emails like this that are going out are clearly aimed at creating fear, and secondly, they're basically aimed at creating confusion, because I'm in touch with a lot of people who know what's going on, and although we're talking about the banks failing, and I know that's going to happen, I don't know when, but this is very close to the bone. It's suggesting that in the next 2 weeks, the world as we know it's going to change completely. What are your thoughts about something like this that's been broadcast to people, and how should they respond to something like this?
So I have a layered response, and let me be responsible and say, so I'm not a soothsayer, and I'm also not a financial markets, that kind of stuff. That's not my expertise, and I don't play in the political arena. I will say this. I heard the phrases that you're mentioning and the article that you're mentioning, and in about 10 minutes, I had a look online at what I could find. And what I could find in 10 minutes of critical thinking, so amygdala pause, take a breath, like, okay, let's have a look at this.
Yeah.
What I could find in just like 5 to 10 minutes is nothing substantial, nothing substantiated. A lot of global thinking, a lot of suggestion, a lot of proposed, but I couldn't find one article, one posting, one document, one website that demonstrates in fact-checking tradition. I couldn't find something of substance. So here's the thing: the virtual reality. Let me add another layer. Post-pandemic, or I want to say in South African context, post-94, but the modern world today exists on the digital economy of distraction and entertainment. And entertainment 101 is about polarity. It's not about truth. It's not about right or wrong. It's about how can I create a gap between what I suggest is right and what I suggest is wrong, what I suggest is good, what I suggest is bad. Because when I create polarity, I create energy. And in a world of consumers go for drama. Consumers are bought in. As the energy increases, the thinking subsides. But the same, actually it's called the drama triangle, the same laws apply for those who coerce and those who control. So, command and control cultures work on the same narrative. Let's create polarity, and in that polarity, the consumers will experience boldness or fear, comfort, adventure, excitement, safe land, or our world is falling apart. And the stronger the polarity, and with that polarity, the more diffused the distinctions are, so the less specificity, then the more power there is in that system. And that's what I see is happening. I'm not here to say it's right or wrong. I'm not going to be a soothsayer. I will say it sounds awfully similar to some conversation just before the pandemic and right through the pandemic, the last big pandemic. And then I will also, from a perspective of responsibility, I'll also mention we are at the end of a 7-year, a 15-year, a 30-year, and an 80-year cycle. So from fiscal perspective, from socioeconomic perspective, from social, it's not political, but from a sociological perspective, life as we know it goes through cycles. And we're in an interesting time, the conflux of more than one cycle. And it's happening in these days.
Yeah.
And in these days, this is why we have so much, not only polarity of ideas, but the ideas create a polarity of energy. And that's why these things are so easy, why they flare up so easy. It's like I was going to show you, I was actually going to prepare a slide deck just to show you how easy it is. In under 7 minutes, I can create a persona. I can create a new Google address, Gmail account, a Google account with a Gmail, which I think can use to subscribe to several platforms, social media platforms. I won't name any one, but this that you're on, and the other one that I'm calling you on, that you're calling me on, I can create accounts. Within 7 minutes, I can create another reality. And it doesn't take long to create a bit of momentum that the average person will not slow down long enough to do a fact check, to go, is this real? Is this not?
Yeah.
Is there substance here?
Yeah.
And it doesn't take long. This is scary to consider, but it doesn't take long for me to just make some polarity and then mess with people's thinking and add hype and add so like both of those acronyms that you mentioned, Gasara and Nasara, there are, in the 5 minutes that I was looking, there are 3 popular versions of those acronyms. When I say popular versions, I mean the words that they, what's the right word, denounce, the words that make up that acronym, there are 3 versions of them. Wikipedia has one, US Today has one, The Economist has another. So which one is it? Because there is already the diffraction of specificity. And in that space, then we can create confusion. And when there's confusion, we can create energy. And then all we need to do is steer the energy to create polarity.
Yeah.
Like even in that email, the world is going to fall apart and it's going to come, in by this time, in 2nd November, end days, Armageddon, but don't worry, just raise your vibration. Yeah. That's, to me, that says polarity, man. That says you're trying to play with my thinking.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there's just one paragraph in this email that I do agree with wholeheartedly, and that is prepping. Get spare food, have extra water available. If you can, have diesel for a generator or solar power, get off the grid, gas for cooking. And the biggie to me is make sure you've got some physical cash, because if your card doesn't work, how are you going to buy anything?
Well, as you say that reminds me of Y2K. Some of the kids won't have a clue what we're talking about, but most of us of age will remember Y2K and how
when
the world
everything
was going to fall apart.
Just fall off. Yeah, everything digital.
And everything digital, and everything with binary code or anything with a password and a code that you have to and a lot of people made a lot of money in Y2K.
And of course,
and
planes were going to fall out of the sky.
Yeah.
I remember that.
Polarity. So I'm not going to say it is or isn't, because I don't know.
Yeah.
What I do know is whether it is or it isn't. If it is, okay, so how I'm going to show up. If I wake up tomorrow and all the banks collapse, okay, who's going to do I have my own power? Am I going to choose power? Or am I going to give my power away? Am I going to abandon myself and become a victim to the scenario that I find myself in? And is my world going to disappear or dissolve in a matter of weeks or days? It doesn't have to be that way.
I'm going to close off with something which is totally unrelated, but just shows a huge disconnect between what is out there and the reality. Now, I've invested in physical silver as an option to fiat money. And there's an article in Zero Hedge right now, which you can go and read, and they're talking about the shortage of physical silver. And there are various types of silver. There's paper silver, where they buy and sell it, or they short it, or they say it's going to go up or it's going to go down. You know how they trade, and that's all bullshit. But that's the effective recognized price of silver based on the paper price. What is absolutely fascinating is that back in 1980, I made a fortune out of silver. I bought it basically at face value, and it went up to 50 times face value, and I sold just before it crashed again. But what's happening right now are these silver bullion dealers. They're offering $10 more per ounce for silver than the price it's been sold for on the paper trail. And that's your reality is what people actually paying for the physical stuff, and the bullshit is the paper price. It's really, really fascinating. If someone is interested in seeing how distorted the markets are, go to zerohedge.com, look for this article about silver, and you'll see what a load of BS is happening in the financial markets, if I can put it that way.
Comes back down to distinctions and what perception of reality can I create for my audience? Yeah. And if I do that well, and I can layer it and package it in polarity, and then the average person, sorry to say, I hope it's not your audience, but the average person is easily caught up in that energy, in that drama, because they're hypnotized. And my invitation to people is, whether you might not agree with me, you might not think that you don't have power over your own reality, my invitation is take back your power.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Robin, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And it's always a pleasure chatting to you. I love your perspective, because, you just give a whole fresh new look at stuff that we worry about, and that's great. And that's what you do. So thank you so much for joining us, and have a great evening.
Thank you, Scott. Good to be here again.
And before you go, is there a message you'd like to give to people?
No, I've said my piece. You can find me online and get activated with Robin on just about any social. And if you've got a question, just shoot me a DM on even on this platform. Get activated with Robin, and I'll do my best to answer.
Okay,
maybe be well.
Just a long shot, because I don't think you've got a forum or something like that, but we have a very active forum on Loving Life TV, and Nat, who actually looks after that, is actually watching right now. Would you be interested in perhaps having articles you put up where you paint a scenario? Like, it might be something like a relationship, or it might be something that happens in the workplace, and then you actually underneath, like you have tonight, give people options on how they can actually resolve that particular type of situation. I mean, it's up to you, but if you'd like to, I can certainly put you in touch with Nat, and she can set that up for you, so you can do that.
Cool, let's chat about it.
All right. I'll get Nat to send you an email, and we'll take it from there. Fantastic. Have a great evening.
Thank you, Scott. And you.
Okay. Cheers.
Ciao.
All right, guys. That was Robin Pullen. And, of course, we were talking about thinking things through from a different perspective and actually surviving the crap that the world is putting us through. And, of course, there were a couple of references there to the pandemic and the last couple of years and the craziness that went on there. I'm going to go no further on that, because this is YouTube, and we know what happens if you say something that you shouldn't. Yeah, you get censored. All right, I'm going to go out with Hier Bly Ek Boer, and yes, I'm doing the dance for the, where are we? There we go, I got it. Okay. Hier Bly Ek Boer, and thanks to the moderators for keeping an eye on the side chat. I see we did have a couple of trolls.
60,000 van ons voorvaders het op die grens vir ons gesterwe, sodat ons vry kan wees. Die is my land, die is my reg. Hier is ek boer. Van stof is ek gemaak en sal ek terugkeer. Die Bybel is die woord waaruit ek leer, soos die grond op die aarde. Hier bly ek boer. Soos diep in die nag sal die vyand kom, maar hier bly ek staan en ek draai nie om, want jy maak my nie bang nie. Hier bly ek boer. Waarvoor ek sal veg, die is my bloed, my sweet, my reg. Die is die plek waar my voorvaders leef. Die is my land, oor wat ek teweeg te bring. My oupa wat Maniekie Roe kon sing, soos hy stap deur die lande. Hier was hy boer. My wortels lê diep in die grond geplant. Hy sien soos my pa, los ek vir jou die land, en jy hoef nie te vrees nie. Hier sal jy boer. Die is my land, waarvoor ek sal veg. Die is my bloed, my zweet, my rug. Die is die plek waar my voorvaders leef. Die is my land, waar wat ek jou sê. Die is my land, wat my mense voer. Hier bly ek voor. Die leeu sal kom, 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 die leeu sal kom.